Now out for the PS5, Xbox, PC and Nintendo Switch 2 is Resident Evil Requiem, the 9th game in the long-running franchise that has series favourite Leon Kennedy return, and we are introduced to a new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft. The previous titles, RE7 and 8, focus on a new character called Ethan Winters, who is searching for his kidnapped wife, and with the sequel his missing daughter. The series wanted to have a character that was more of an everyman, and not a buff cop or military expert. But Ethan Winters, to me, didn't quite have the personality of the legacy characters of the series, such as Chris and Claire Redfield, Jill Valentine, and of course Leon Kennedy. As the Ethan Winters storyline had been tied up by the end of Resident Evil Village, Capcom weren't going to let the series come to an end, as this franchise is still very profitable for the company, and having Leon Kennedy return seemed to have been an easy win, with Requiem already outperforming Resident Evil 4 and Village in sales. For the game's plot, we are introduced to FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft, who is tasked to investigate the mysterious deaths of Raccoon City survivors due to some late form of onset T-virus infection. She returns to the abandoned hotel where her mother died 8 years prior, where the latest killing has occurred, with her boss thinking there is a connection. Upon arriving at the hotel, Grace comes across evidence that somebody has been stalking her, and perhaps connected to the death of her mother. She recovers a data disk left behind by her mother prior to her death. Grace is then suddenly attacked and abducted by ex-Umbrella scientist Victor Gideon. Meanwhile, across town, Leon Kennedy and Sherry Birkin, who are both suffering from the T-virus but are taking meds to slow it down, are also investigating the string of deaths, and Leon is sent to investigate the same hotel. He arrives just in time, spotting Gideon kidnapping Grace. Gideon knows he's been spotted and causes a small T-virus outbreak as a distraction. Leon cuts through the chaos and loses Gideon, but Sherry is able to track him back to his clinic. Grace regains consciousness in the clinic, finding her blood is being siphoned, and escapes captivity just as Leon arrives. As Grace tries to escape, a giant monster is roaming around the upper floors of the clinic. Leon fights off the infected downstairs. Meanwhile, Grace encounters a young blind girl named Emily in a confinement cell. Grace and Leon each learn that Gideon is obsessed with completing the Elpis project, which allows the use of the T-virus to transfer a person's consciousness into other bodies, with Grace being the key. I did enjoy the last two Resident Evil games with 7 and 8, though I didn't return to 7 once I completed it, as I wasn't too keen on the FPS approach. I picked up Resident Evil Village once they patched it to include a third-person perspective, which to me is how Resident Evil should be played, but I wasn't completely enamoured with the Ethan Winters storyline, but I had fun with the games and they both looked amazing. Once they announced they would be returning to Raccoon City with Leon Kennedy, it certainly got me excited to see where they would go with it. So the first half of the story focuses around Grace. The game recommends you play as her with the first-person perspective, and Leon in the traditional third-person. As I'm a fussy man, I play the entire game in the traditional way, but as you play through as Grace, there are moments that go straight to the FPS angle, as the game designers intended. Once the game starts, you are mostly playing in a limited way, so for example, walk here, collect this key, then you have a cutscene, walk a little more, and it repeats. The game cuts back and forth between Leon and Grace to make the events eventually sync up. When you are playing as Leon, you run through the streets, shooting the infected, you enter the clinic to find Grace, and encounter a bunch of zombies, with one holding the chainsaw, which allows you to use it as a weapon, and it's glorious cutting up these zombies. The combat is similar to Resident Evil 4, but you have the opportunity now to parry attacks, but Leon's melee attacks is with his trusty roundhouse kick, and you can deliver the final blow with your secondary weapon, the hatchet. The combat is dialed back when compared to the very flawed but successful Resident Evil 6, which had Leon doing all sorts of moves to attack and to avoid being hit. The game doesn't really get going until over an hour into it. It teases us a few times with some snippets of solid gameplay, then it's cut short, which I felt was a bit of a jarring experience. The majority of the Resident Evil games have a little bit of setup to introduce you to the story, then you are off on your own to begin collecting items and solving pretty straightforward puzzles, which makes them very easy to return to for a quick playthrough, or to grab stuff you may have missed the first time. But with this lengthy build-up, I did get a feeling that I probably wouldn't be in too much of a rush to play through this again, despite enjoying the overall experience. With the new character Grace, she is a bit of a wet blanket through most of the first few hours of gameplay, constantly panicking, out of breath, runs like an old lady. It's like you are controlling Lester the Unlikely. I get it, she's not a trained military expert who can deal with combat, but after a while, you just want her to get her act together. Early on you encounter the big monster called the Shadow Ghost, which roams around the building who looks like something YouTuber Papa Meat would design. These sequences play out like Alien Isolation, where you have to hide and sneak around. but it's not as random as Isolation, as it's more scripted with how the monster appears, and it's pretty easy to avoid. Once you are in the main lobby, this is where the fun starts and finally feels like a proper Resident Evil game. You have to be strict with your ammo and try to avoid the regular zombies, who are not too difficult to sneak and run past. You have a blood collector which allows you to combine blood with scrap to craft items such as ammo, which doesn't really make much sense, but hey, this is Resident Evil. But this chapter of the game is where it gets really intense and makes you manage your inventory carefully, as you have to find 3 items to open the main door to escape. I spent ages trying to find one piece of the puzzle. The map is very helpful, but I missed out one section, as you can walk past it and miss it completely, with the entrance to the garage. The big zombie chef, which is pretty intimidating, is very creepy, and you try to avoid him most of the time until I figured out you have to kill him to gain access to the pantry, which doesn't happen that often in Resident Evil games, with an enemy holding an item you need. Often keys or keycards are unlocked by completing a puzzle. From this point on, I will be discussing minor spoilers, so skip here to get to my final thoughts. Once we finally get to Raccoon City, which is roughly 5 hours into the game, it's a completely different experience. No more puzzles for Leon, as you have to collect 3 pieces to create a detonator to enter Ground Zero. There is a bit of thought in how to get those pieces. It's not a simple A to B, but the puzzle approach is left to grace. So with Leon, it's all about combat, and there are no worries about item management, as you get your usual briefcase that can house tons of items. You get to upgrade your weapons as a sort of points-based system, or purchase new ones very much like Resident Evil 4. I think Capcom are trying to please fans who enjoy this series for the survival elements and those who enjoy non-stop action, but it doesn't quite find the right balance compared to Resident Evil Village. For the majority of the Raccoon City chapter, you encounter these generic zombies who crawl out the ground and throw stuff at you. There are a bunch of military troops who were sent in earlier but were infected with the T-virus, who provide a bit of a challenge as they have body armor, carry grenades, and some are holding machine guns they fire randomly. Throughout the game, zombies will be reanimated and are more aggressive, very much like the remake of RE1 with the Crimson Zombies. You do have a tool at your disposal to stop this second wave of infection, but I often forgot about doing that. As you walk around this post-apocalyptic setting, it's very grey and samey throughout, looking like an early PS3 game, not in terms of detail, but those early PlayStation 3 titles that looked drab with their lack of colour. But I did get very excited when you return to the remains of the police station. And the music from the original game plays hauntingly in the background as you enter some of the rooms for that nostalgic hit, but the majority of the rooms are completely destroyed or are inaccessible. Leon begins having flashbacks to the events of RE2, which taps into the trauma he's still suffering from. When you are running around Raccoon City, it does become fan service, which I honestly didn't mind at all, as your first encounter is with a giant spider. You also encounter a mini-boss with a giant plant, both reminiscent of Resident Evil 1, and Mr. X has returned. His battle is pretty easy and short-lived, but enjoyable nonetheless. The more you play as Leon, it does bring over elements of Resident Evil 6. As you control a motorbike while travelling across the ruins of Raccoon City, shooting these zombie-like wolves, and battle Gideon. It does make for a nice change of pace, but it did feel like a cinematic roller coaster. The graphics are pretty incredible during this sequence, but I didn't feel it was much of a challenge, as you don't do much to control it, all you do is steer and shoot, but it did look awesome how it played out. Once we cut back to Grace, we have a flashback, and you are controlling a young girl, as she attempts to escape from the raccoon orphanage. This whole sequence slowed the game down, and brought it to a grinding halt. This probably could have been a story-based cutscene to speed through it. On a presentation level, the graphics are superb throughout. Capcom's trusted RE engine continues to do an impressive job. Despite the lengthy cutscenes, they are very cinematic with their framing, with fantastic lighting and animation. The frame rate throughout the game appeared pretty rock solid, though it did visibly dip in Raccoon City when you come out the subway for a random moment. I can't really fault the presentation, it's the high quality you come to expect from Capcom. The sound design certainly keeps you jumping out of your seat if you have a home cinema setup or good headphones. The musical score does its job, but didn't really stand out to me, and only grabbed my attention when they homaged the themes of the previous titles. Aside from that minor complaint, the audio/visual qualities are to what you expect from a AAA title. Overall, I did enjoy the game, the combat was fun, and there are plenty of nerve-wracking moments, but I do think it does have some pacing issues, especially near the beginning and for the final act, with larger locations with not much going on between the odd zombie battle and little use of the puzzle elements. Capcom did get a bit carried away with the lengthy cutscenes, which makes the first hour or so not particularly fun to return to. It's slow and gets bogged down with limited gameplay. Of course you can skip all those cutscenes and just speed your way through the little moments of gameplay to get to the main meat of the game, but structurally I wish Capcom had more up front. Some of my problems can be lumped into that nitpicking category, as some fans won't be bothered with some of the issues I've raised. It doesn't stop the game from being a worthy new entry into the series. I've enjoyed most of the Resident Evil games. There are some crap spin-off titles, but the main series is very good, and I've gone back to them many times, so there is replay value there, but Resident Evil 9 doesn't quite have me wanting to pick it up for a second playthrough so soon. Maybe in a few months' time I'll go back to it, to complete some of the challenges the game offers as extra bonuses and find some of the missing paper reports scattered around the levels. There may not be anything particularly innovating in Resident Evil 9, they have fine-tuned the combat, provided a pretty interesting story that's as ridiculous as ever, and leaves it very much open for number 10. So in all, a pretty solid game that has a few nagging issues with pacing and the balance between survival horror and action. I think when it comes to playing as Leon, people expect Capcom to go the action route, but having some extra elements that require some thought for the player instead of the attitude of going in guns blazing would have benefited the overall experience.
Matron, take them away!
Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.